Imagine a city rising from the dust of the desert, a city that shone like a mirage, glittering with wealth, pleasure, and innovation. This was Sodom, a place so famous, so decadent, that its very name still echoes thousands of years later as a symbol of corruption, excess, and destruction. But before it fell into infamy, Sodom was a marvel. To understand why its end was so violent and unforgettable, we must first step inside its walls, explore its secrets, and uncover the brilliance that made it one of the most enigmatic cities of the ancient world. The first thing that strikes us about Sodom is not its destruction, but its astonishing prosperity. While neighboring tribes struggled to survive under the scorching desert sun, Sodom flourished. Its markets overflowed with exotic goods, its palaces gleamed with gold, and its people lived lives of comfort and indulgence. Yet beneath the glittering surface, shadows lurked, shadows of cruelty, arrogance, and moral decay. Let us begin with one of Sodom's most guarded mysteries, its hidden river. Beneath the very foundations of the city ran an underground water system that few outside its priesthood and engineers even knew existed. Imagine tunnels carved deep into the earth, lined with smooth, polished stones to prevent leakage. Water flowed through these secret veins, filling vast cisterns hidden beneath palaces and temples. From these reservoirs, fountains bubbled in courtyards, canals crossed public squares, and hanging gardens defied the desert's harshness with lush greenery. For travelers arriving from drought-stricken lands, the sight was miraculous. In a place where water meant survival, Sodom seemed almost divine. Fountains sprayed mist into the hot air, artificial lakes reflected the skies, and ornamental canals shimmered with light. Many believed this abundance was proof that Sodom had the blessing of heaven itself. But the truth was far more earthly. The people of Sodom guarded the secret of their river with ruthless cruelty. Any citizen who revealed its location to outsiders was executed. This secrecy transformed water, a gift of life, into a tool of control, feeding the arrogance of a people who thought themselves invincible. If water gave Sodom life, its walls gave it confidence. The city was surrounded by fortifications that were the envy of the ancient world. Rising more than 10 meters high, equivalent to a modern 3-story building, they stretched in a double line, enclosing the city in an almost impenetrable embrace. Between these walls lay hidden corridors where archers could move unseen, ready to strike down attackers from the shadows. At sunset, when the clay bricks caught the dying light, the city seemed to blaze as if wrapped in fire. Massive gates, reinforced with wood and heavy metal plates, stood as guardians of this fortress. Opening or closing them required the combined strength of 6 men. With such defenses, Sodom believed it was untouchable. To its inhabitants, the walls were not just protection, they were a declaration of superiority. No one can touch us, they thought. And with this illusion of invincibility came a dangerous pride. For when a people begin to believe they are beyond judgment, how far will their arrogance take them? But Sodom was not only about security and survival. It was about pleasure taken to extremes. Within its banquet halls, intoxication reached levels few outsiders could even comprehend. These were no ordinary feasts of bread and wine. Archaeological findings suggest the use of powerful hallucinogens, opium, mandrake extracts, and desert plants mixed into drinks and pastes. Guests consumed these substances not only to heighten their senses but to transport themselves into trances they believed were encounters with the divine. Imagine torches flickering against painted walls, musicians filling the air with hypnotic rhythms, while men and women danced tirelessly, driven by forces they thought were supernatural. Some swore they spoke with gods. Others claimed to travel to other realms. These experiences blurred the line between reality and vision, indulgence and madness. For many, the price was permanent. Some never returned from their delirium, reduced to shadows of themselves, wandering souls broken by their own pursuit of pleasure. Yet in Sodom, such ruin was not seen as tragedy, but as proof of communion with forces beyond mortal understanding. While other nations struggled with famine and scarcity, Sodom enjoyed another gift from the earth itself, bitumen, or natural asphalt, bubbling from the ground in thick, black pools. This substance, sticky and pungent, was more precious than gold in the ancient world. Caravans came from Egypt and beyond to purchase it, for it preserved bodies in embalming rituals, sealed sacred boats against water, and was even used in construction. The demand was insatiable, and Sodom profited immensely. Imagine merchants arriving after long desert journeys, their camels laden with silver and exotic goods, only to trade it all for this strange, tar-like treasure. With every deal, Sodom's wealth grew, feeding its reputation as a city not just of abundance but of dominance. Yet as history has often shown, sudden wealth can corrupt as swiftly as it enriches. Prosperity gave Sodom power, but it also fed its growing arrogance, its sense that nothing, neither nature, nor enemies, nor even God, could bring it down. The city's brilliance extended beyond resources and trade. Its architecture was a marvel, blending artistry with intimidation. Palaces rose like mountains of stone and clay, decorated with gleaming ornaments that reflected the desert sun. Columns carved to resemble trees stretched skyward, while walls painted with bright pigments told stories of conquest and celebration. Within the palaces, feasts displayed not just food but excess. Long cedar tables lined with dishes of honey-preserved fruits, smoked meats sealed in bitumen, and wines aged for decades. Guests reclined on couches, feasting not simply to eat, but to demonstrate power. In these halls, food itself was prestige. Some families kept delicacies preserved for generations, bringing them out in ceremonies as living relics of abundance. Imagine a host boasting, "This bread was baked in my grandfather's time," while servants carried it with reverence, as if it were more sacred than holy offerings. To the poor or the outsider, such displays must have seemed obscene. But to the Sodomite elite, they were proof of superiority, a declaration that scarcity, hunger, and humility had no place within their walls. And so, Sodom stood as a paradox. To the eyes of outsiders, it was paradise, fertile, powerful, and dazzling. Yet to those who looked deeper, it was a place where prosperity had become poison, where abundance fed arrogance, and where pleasure consumed the very essence of humanity. Its underground river, its towering walls, its intoxicating banquets, its pools of black gold, all were achievements. Yet each also carried a hidden curse, a subtle erosion of the values that sustain societies. The people of Sodom believed they had conquered nature. They believed their wealth was endless, their defenses unbreakable, and their pleasures untouchable. They were wrong. For history, and scripture, tell us that when arrogance blinds a civilization, its fall is never far away. This is only the beginning of Sodom's story. We have glimpsed its hidden river, its mighty walls, its feasts, and its wealth. But darker secrets still await us, temples of strange rituals, courts of injustice, festivals of chaos, and the cruelty that turned the city's name into a warning for all time. The glory of Sodom was dazzling. But the cracks in its foundation had already begun to spread. The city of Sodom dazzled every outsider with its wealth, its hidden river, its impregnable walls, and its intoxicating banquets. But beyond the glitter, beyond the shimmering palaces and lavish celebrations, there existed a darker reality. What looked like a paradise from afar was, in truth, a civilization slowly rotting from the inside. If the first part of this story revealed the mask of Sodom, now we step behind that mask, into the shadows, to witness arrogance, cruelty, and corruption consuming the heart of the city. Legends speak of warriors who stood guard outside the palaces, covered in shining armor and golden masks. At first glance they seemed to be statues, frozen in time, sculpted to intimidate visitors with their silence. But the truth was far more disturbing. These were not lifeless figures. They were men trained from childhood to stand motionless for hours, to breathe without moving, to wait in perfect stillness until the moment came to strike. Outsiders described them as terrifying, living statues that suddenly came alive, attacking intruders with ruthless brutality. Some tales even claim that criminals were executed and preserved in strange stone-like coatings, placed in public as eternal warnings. Whether truth or myth, one lesson was clear: Sodom forgave nothing. In this city, even death became spectacle. Sodom was also unlike its neighbors in the role women played. Where other kingdoms were ruled by men, here women often commanded influence, wealth, and even ritual authority. Adorned in heavy gold necklaces, chokers that left scars on their necks, and anklets so weighty they deformed the very bones of their legs, these women wore jewelry not as decoration but as symbols of dominance. At night, under moonlight, they danced through temple courts in garments woven so thin they revealed the body beneath, shimmering with pigments of gold dust that turned their movements into living illusions. Foreign visitors, stunned by these ceremonies, often confused them with divine visions. Yet beneath the beauty lay manipulation, for these rituals blurred the line between worship and indulgence, between spirituality and excess. This obsession with appearance extended far beyond jewelry. The people of Sodom crafted clothing from rare, translucent fabrics that clung to the body like mist. Their fashion shocked outsiders not only for its boldness but for its arrogance. The garments were designed to seduce, to flaunt, to turn ordinary life into performance. On nights of celebration, hundreds of women walked through the streets shimmering under torchlight, their clothes like flowing silver water. For the citizens, this was art. For outsiders, it was scandal. But Sodom was not concerned with what others thought. It was a society drunk on itself. The markets reflected this same philosophy. Here, nothing was sacred and everything had a price. Merchants did not merely sell spices, fabrics, and pottery. They sold water collected in jars, air trapped in clay containers, and even the shade of trees, rented by the hour. Foreigners arriving hungry and thirsty quickly discovered that compassion was outlawed. To give food or water without charge was punishable by death. Every interaction was a transaction, every act of kindness transformed into a crime. Visitors who dared to protest were dragged before courts where justice was twisted beyond recognition. These courts, towering with marble columns and suffocating incense, were less halls of law than theaters of extortion. Judges in robes of gold and black delivered verdicts not by evidence but by greed. Innocent men were condemned while criminals prospered. A traveler who gave bread to a starving beggar could lose his cargo, his wealth, and sometimes his life. The very people tasked with protecting truth had turned into predators. In such a world, festivals became the purest expression of the city's spirit. These were not ordinary celebrations. They stretched on for weeks, sometimes 40 days without pause, drowning the streets in music, firelight, and intoxicating indulgence. Torches lit up the plazas, bonfires sent shadows dancing across the walls, and the sound of drums, flutes, and harps echoed day and night without rest. Meat roasted in open flames while servants carried endless trays of spiced wine. The rules of law were suspended, crimes were ignored, and restraint disappeared. For the wealthy, these festivals were a display of power. For the poor, they were a chance to lose themselves in chaos. For outsiders, they were proof of a city spiraling into madness. Officially, these celebrations were dedicated to gods. But in truth, they honored nothing but human desire. And yet, among the ruins left behind, archaeologists uncovered something far more mysterious: fragments of inscriptions carved into stones, filled with symbols unlike any known alphabet. They were not Sumerian, nor Egyptian, nor any writing system we can recognize. Some resembled maps of the stars, others geometric codes that hinted at secret knowledge. Scholars suggest they may have been records of rituals, formulas for controlling water or bitumen, or agreements among the city's judges. The truth remains unknown, for most of these inscriptions have vanished, erased by wind, fire, and time. It is as if history itself conspired to silence Sodom's voice, leaving us only fragments of its secrets and mysteries that will never be solved. Piece by piece, the illusion of Sodom falls away. The glorious walls, the intoxicating fashion, the endless banquets, all were only distractions from a far darker reality. Behind the beauty was cruelty. Behind the wealth was arrogance. Behind the laughter was decay. It was a society where law protected corruption, religion fed indulgence, and compassion was a crime. A city where kindness was punished, where wealth blinded the powerful, and where humanity itself was traded away. This was no accident. This was the inevitable consequence of arrogance. A society that believes itself untouchable does not merely decline, it collapses. And in Sodom, that collapse was closer than its people could ever imagine. The story does not end here. In the final part, we will enter the temples where human sacrifices were offered in desperate times, descend into the courts where justice became perversion, and witness the cataclysmic event that obliterated the city in fire. The splendor of Sodom is fading, and the darkness of its downfall is about to begin. The final days of Sodom were unlike anything history had seen before. From the outside, the city still appeared untouchable. Its walls still stood proud, its markets still overflowed with goods, and its festivals still thundered with music and fire. But beneath the surface, cracks were spreading. A society that once prided itself on strength had now begun to devour itself from within. The whispers of cruelty grew louder, and the rituals of corruption more frequent. It was as though the city itself sensed an approaching end but chose to dance in defiance rather than repent in humility. In the hidden chambers of the temple, rituals reached their darkest form. The torches that burned in those underground sanctuaries were unlike ordinary flames. They glowed in shades of blue and green, fueled by the strange minerals of the valley. Their light cast eerie reflections across polished black stone walls etched with unrecognizable symbols. At the center, an altar stood, smooth, cold, and carved with grooves that guided blood toward waiting vessels. It was not enough for the people of Sodom to feast or celebrate. When famine threatened or earthquakes shook the ground, they turned to sacrifice. And not of animals, of humans. The city drums beat like a storm, echoing through every street to announce that blood would be spilled for the gods. Outsiders cowered, and even citizens lowered their heads in dread. Some say children were offered, chosen in silence, their cries swallowed by the roar of ritual music. Others claim it was foreigners who bore the brunt, unfortunate travelers who wandered into the wrong city at the wrong time. Their fates sealed not by justice but by superstition. In these moments, the people of Sodom revealed the depth of their descent. They had not only lost compassion, they had surrendered to savagery disguised as faith. The courts of Sodom were no better. Inside their marble halls, lined with crimson columns and thick with incense smoke, justice was a performance rather than a principle. Judges sat like kings on high thrones, their robes woven with gold threads that shimmered in the flickering light. But these robes hid hearts made of stone. For in Sodom, guilt or innocence was irrelevant. Only power mattered. A poor man who gave food to the starving was condemned. A traveler who protested against extortion was stripped of everything. The verdict was always predetermined, and the price was always paid in wealth or blood. Witnesses say that laughter often erupted in the courts when innocents pleaded for mercy. For Sodom's judges, cruelty was entertainment. Foreigners who entered the city faced humiliation beyond comprehension. Hospitality, which in most ancient cultures was sacred, was in Sodom turned into mockery. Travelers were invited to rest in the city, only to find themselves abused. Some were forced to dance on burning coals while crowds jeered. Others were stripped of clothing, smeared with tar, and paraded through the streets as living spectacles. Stones and insults rained upon them while children clapped. To Sodom, cruelty was not hidden in shadows, it was celebrated in daylight. The city had taken mockery and crowned it as custom. Even food became a display of arrogance. Archaeologists tell us that the people of Sodom mastered preservation techniques so advanced that bread, wine, and meat lasted for generations. In the great halls of the wealthy, families boasted of eating food older than themselves. Loaves baked in the days of grandfathers, wines aged until their jars turned black, fruits preserved in honey for decades. To the citizens, this was luxury beyond imagination. But it was also a symbol of pride. They ate not to survive, but to flaunt power, to laugh at time itself. In this abundance, gratitude died. For when a people forget hunger, they forget humility. But nature had its own laws, laws no city could rewrite. The valley of Sodom was a land of strange beauty but also immense danger. Beneath its fertile surface lay fault lines, gases, and minerals waiting to ignite. And then, one day, the sky answered the arrogance of the city. Imagine the horizon suddenly lit by a blinding flash, brighter than the sun. A great fireball tore through the heavens, exploding with the force of 1,000 storms. The air ignited, stones turned molten, and walls thought indestructible collapsed like sand. Witnesses, if any survived, would have seen a column of fire descending from the sky, followed by a shockwave that flattened everything in its path. The very earth shook, and the valley was swallowed in smoke and ash. This was no ordinary disaster. It was annihilation. Modern scientists believe an asteroid may have exploded above the region with heat so intense that it scorched the land instantly. Entire buildings vaporized. Crops turned to cinders. Human bodies may have been flash burned into crystalline salt. And when the dust cleared, silence reigned. The markets where laughter once roared were now charred ruins. The palaces of gold were shattered into fragments. The festivals of fire had been replaced by a fire none could control. The city that mocked compassion, that outlawed mercy, that glorified cruelty, was gone in a single instant. The legend of Lot's wife, who turned to salt as she looked back upon the destruction, carries echoes of geological truth. The Dead Sea Valley is rich with salt deposits, and the catastrophic heat could have encased bodies in crystalline layers, leaving behind eerie shapes that stood like statues. Even today, strange salt pillars rise from the barren shores of the Dead Sea, twisted forms that resemble human silhouettes. For those who know the story, they are silent guardians, haunting reminders of a judgment written both in scripture and in stone. But perhaps the greatest legacy of Sodom is not its destruction, but its memory. Across cultures and centuries, the name of Sodom became a warning. Kings, prophets, and poets alike invoked it as a symbol of arrogance punished, of wealth without compassion, of power without restraint. To this day, when one speaks of corruption beyond redemption, the word, Sodom, still lingers on the tongue. The city outlived itself not through survival, but through infamy. What lesson does this tale hold for us now? That wealth without humility breeds arrogance. That abundance without gratitude breeds excess. That law without justice breeds cruelty. And that a civilization that punishes kindness cannot endure. Sodom believed it was invincible, yet the sky itself proved otherwise. And so the story closes, with the smoke of destruction fading into silence. Silence heavier than stone. Silence that echoes louder than music. Silence that speaks across the ages, whispering the truth no civilization dares to ignore. No city, no empire, no people can stand forever when it turns its back on humanity. Sodom was not merely destroyed by fire. It was consumed by the very arrogance it embraced. And its ruins remain, both in the ground beneath our feet and in the warnings etched into our collective memory.